Well, Apple was going to be dead last coming out with something, but at least they'd put their own spin on it and it'd be working well. Now they come out with something not necessarily the best, not necessarily the most polished, and not necessarily working.
Hello and welcome to the Android Police Podcast. My name is Daniel Bader. This week on the show, we're talking all about Google's new Android XR platform. We're talking about Gemini 2.0, some crazy new prototype hardware from Google and Samsung. It's an interesting week. Everybody's shipping. OpenAI just released Sora. iOS 18.2 is available. We're digging into One UI 7. The S25 is coming out early next year. OnePlus 13. There's a lot going on. Joining me this week, Stephen Radochia, AP's resident New Jerseyan. Phone writer, new to the team, relatively new.
Yep, a few months now.
How's it going? What's going on?
Going well. You know, it's been a wonderful experience. I'm glad to be on here today. I always enjoy talking about this stuff and some of the interesting stuff that we're talking about today. I mean, it's good because smartphones in general. Well, I don't want to cop out and say, well, they're getting stale and all the rest of it, but I do believe there needed to be some injection of something new on the UI side, and I do think some of the stuff that we're talking about today certainly provides that and makes the smartphone side, at least on the software side, a bit more interesting than it has been for, let's say, the last couple of years.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. So before we dive into the topics today, I want to level set a little bit. Tell people a little bit about you, because you're not new to the industry. You're just relatively new to the full-time staff on
Full-time,
AP.
yeah. I've been writing for 2 years now for AP. I started YouTube about 5 years ago. It was during the pandemic, during shutdown. I was working another job. I was somebody who already carried 3 or 4 phones around just naturally, and instead of people whispering behind my back or family members questioning what I did for a living, I just made it legitimate, putting videos out there on them, and then people started watching them, which was great. And then all of a sudden, I reached out to AP. I said, "Hey, I see that you're looking for somebody to write about these things. I already got them anyway. Why don't I write about them?" And that's what I started doing about 2 years ago. And then a few months ago, I said, "Hey, why don't you come and do it full time?" So that now that's what I do.
So it's interesting. When I first heard your voice, I was like, this guy needs to be the voice of Android Police.
I appreciate it.
You've got the most incredible radio voice. It's like, did you ever consider being like a radio announcer?
So I did radio in college. That's where I got started. So that's okay. Before there were, to not to date myself. I know that we're similar in age, I believe. But when I was in college in the late 90s, early 2000s, there wasn't YouTube. I always wanted to do something in media. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't where YouTube, where you just plug in and you have an internet connection. All of a sudden, you could do your own little show. There wasn't anything like that. So I did college radio. I did that stuff, but there weren't a whole lot of outlets for these type of things unless you went that entire path of journalism and video, and then you went on television. There wasn't an easy path like there is now, which is fantastic. But so I did do college radio for a while and then moved to YouTube. But it was a big gap. It was about a 15, 20-year gap between the two because the technology wasn't there. The barrier to entry was just too high to be in media unless you were really, you had to get lucky. You had to get very lucky, hard work, and all the rest of it. But YouTube just made it very accessible.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I was on radio for a minute in university as well, but it comes less naturally to me, I think. And
you do a great job on here. I see it every week.
Thank you, but I've been doing it for 15 years.
Okay,
I've been podcasting for 15 years now.
Okay.
And
you were early then. That was the early days.
Yeah. I hosted a podcast at a site that I ran called Mobile Syrup for a long time, for 5 years before I moved over to Android Central, where I took over the hosting duties of that podcast. And now, because I just needed to talk to the internet for my own ego's sake.
I listen. That's a big part of it.
I'm a big proponent of just like doing the thing that makes you uncomfortable.
Right.
I often talk about how my big regret in life, I mean, I'm almost 40, is that I haven't written my first novel yet. And how, there's so many, you put up all these roadblocks for yourself. I mean, this is a show about technology, but if you listen to the show, you know that it's as much a show about psychology and
which it has to be.
The inner workings of the human mind.
Right.
And my damaged mind prevents me from once I'm finished work for the day, sitting down and writing the requisite 2,500 words to put together a novel, right? Like
Right.
I just don't have, but for me, podcasting with somebody I love, and I love Will, and I've loved all my previous co-hosts, Ara and all the folks at Android Central, is just that you get to chat with your friend every week about the things that make you passionate. And that's why we haven't really done much with this show. As much as I respect all the big, Vergecast style shows out there that are businesses in and of themselves.
Sure.
I think for me, it's about keeping this honest and about keeping expectations in check. I listen to the big ones, the beautifully produced podcasts, and that has to be a full-time job.
Yeah.
But
it's more relatable. It's more real. I mean, that's something on the YouTube side that I try to keep. I'm not big on B-roll. Like, even I got to get better for the AP videos that we do as far as B-roll and all that stuff is concerned. But that doesn't come naturally to me either, because it's more, I want to have this long form conversation about the content. I want to have, like you said, that more casual, the raw takes. That's why I like working for AP. You allow me a lot of leeway as far as the opinions are concerned and how they're framed and the arguments, and it's something you don't really get other places. And when I read other content, I was seeing other sites, it's just not that connection with the audience. And trying to give honest is rough, because I hate when people say honest reviewer. Not to say that the other sites aren't giving honest reviews, but it's not something that translates well to people who are just walking into their carrier store trying to make a decision on a device, or they're looking in Best Buy, and it's not, it can relate to both enthusiasts and people who are just trying to make a good buying decision with their money.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think the more natural approach, like you said, just really, really keeps.
This is a good segue into the topics today, because Google is really pushing Gemini 2.0 as the next big thing. And I think there are three themes here. One is that Gemini 2.0 is naturally multimodal. And because of that, it doesn't need separate models for audio, video, and text. It's all just one. And it's much more efficient, which means that even though it's not something, so they're dividing this into right now Gemini 2.0 Flash, which is a model that is much more compact. It's not the nano model that's going to live natively on your phone, but it's getting to the point where it's a cheaper, more efficient model to run, which means that you can productize it far more easily. And this is the one that's going to take over Google Gemini when you go to the website or you open the app. But more than that, it's the one that's going to be powering all of the experiences that's in Android XR. And it's coinciding with this big announcement around prototype VR and AR hardware that Google made alongside Samsung yesterday. So I wanted to get your take on it, because there are a lot of kind of big themes in this.
Sure.
One is just that Google continues to iterate at a very fast clip to take on OpenAI, right? OpenAI released Sora this week, which is its video creation model, and it's available to everybody now.
Yeah, played with this one last night.
And what did you think? Because I'm finding the Uncanny Valley stuff to be really off-putting.
Yeah, no, it is off-putting. It took about a 480p video, 5 seconds took about a minute from the time that I put the prompt in to the time when I got the output. They say a 720p, which is what I'm limited to. 720p, 5 seconds was what I'm limited to at the $20 a month level, and then you have the $200 a month level, which you could go 1080p. I think it's 20 seconds, and
which is bananas, right? Yeah. $200 a month is. It's an expense that a CTO will make every month, but like normal people are not spending $200.
Well, and that's the thing. If it's content creation, I could start to see the value building. If you need, I don't want to say B-roll, but if you need these background things, there's all these channels popping up. If you're a company that needs a visual for something, instead of going on Fiverr, I mean, for me at the $20 level, so let's say I go on Fiverr or one of these other sites that you could get talented work. Instead of paying like $50, maybe someone looks at that and says, well, it's $20, I can get what I need, and it's fine. And you're right, but the output, I just typed in the prompt I typed in was black cat plays with ornament on a Christmas tree. And within a minute I had it, and it was you're right. It starts to get a little on the freaky side. I mean, if you had told me that it wasn't my cat playing on a tree, you just showed me a video, I'd have to look 2 or 3 times to know whether that was something that was real or not. It's still stylized. You can still sort of tell the difference, but it's getting there. And the speed of it and just what it can do and the motions, it was certainly an interesting experience. But I could start to see the value there building, whereas I didn't before. If you were somebody who was a coder or something and you needed OpenAI, you needed ChatGPT, and you were paying for the speed and you were paying per month, that's fine. But it was more like you had to prompt it. You had to know how you wanted to use the system. I think now we're getting to the point where I don't necessarily have to know how I want to use it. I could just have a problem, put it in, and then all of a sudden I get a solution on the back end. So that might start being worth money.
Yeah, I mean, in the early days of ChatGPT, people started talking about prompt engineering and how important it was to understand you're not necessarily creating content, but you can train yourself to be a better prompt engineer,
right?
Which will help generate better quality output from the models. And there were whole swaths of people being like, you can't understand this until you really dig into like the white papers on prompt engineering.
Right,
and like
exactly.
People are going to go to school for prompt engineering. And it's like, okay, fine. But what we're seeing here is that you're taking folks that are not naturally artistically inclined, visually artistically inclined, and allowing them to use their mastery of language to generate better visual art and experiences.
Sure.
And now that translates more into video. And like, that's great. You know, if I can produce 2, 5, 10, 50 seconds of B-roll to go with like say your videos, right?
Yeah.
You're not somebody who wants to like pan a camera across a table of a phone, but you can create that amount of B-roll using Sora.
Sure.
Why not? And if it looks authentic, what difference does it make? It's just B-roll.
And the editing has gotten a lot better. Before, if you had a video or if it was an image that you didn't like and you re-rolled, you were getting something. You weren't getting minor changes. The whole thing was being regenerated.
Right.
Now you can just put into Sora's like, I don't like that door, or I don't like that light that's used. Change out the light. And the example that they had was it just changes out the door and then just keeps going, but with the same video package, which I think is interesting. So the editing has gotten a lot easier as well.
I think that's going to be the key differentiator in these products. The fact that Sora has like a native remix feature too, where not only is there a discover feed similar to another social network, but you can take other people's publicly created videos and use those as a jumping off point for your own creations.
Yeah, it's really
That's
cool.
Fascinating to me, right? You're building out, like TikTok is already full of AI slop.
Yes.
You're going to see so much more of this. And my concern is, so there's 2 things here, right? One is with, you know, the latest ChatGPT models with Gemini 2.0, we're diving headlong into what they consider to be better, more efficient models, but they're not saying hallucinations are going away. They're not saying that we're getting rid of misinformation.
Right.
They're just saying this model will do a better job with the current data set. But the data itself is not cleaner. At least that's the impression I get.
And it's very scary. And I know you've talked about this on the podcast before. I think it was what Gemini could do in making notes or a script into a podcast, or no, not even notes or a script. I think it was just a topic into a full podcast. And there was a video I was watching on something completely. It was a bowling ball review video. And
I love that you watch bowling ball reviews.
Oh, I'm a big bowler. So Jersey,
that checks, man. I love this.
2 leagues. That's it, 2 leagues. So yeah, I'm watching a bowling ball review, and it's something you don't expect AI on. And I'm just listening, not even thinking anything, because it's the same thing. Like they're cutting and they're like, yeah, oh, how about this or whatever. But then it doubled itself. It said the same thing twice. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a little awkward. Go back to the beginning with a different lens. It was one of those AI podcast type deals.
Right.
And I was like, this is like, what? So yeah, on a ball review video. So this is where you said it crosses over. Now that's something non-mission critical. If I buy the wrong bowling ball because some podcasts where I think is two people who actually used it are talking about it. That's not the end of the world. But like you said, if the misinformation starts getting in there, and I'm thinking this is a legitimate, these sound like two reasonable people. I'm just listening in the background. I'm not paying attention. It sounds like a news broadcast or something like that. And they had realistic looking video behind it. And then all of a sudden there's this misinformation coming in. What's the stopgap? What's the defense behind it?
Is this making all the bowling ball influencers super uncomfortable?
Oh, they're nervous. They got to be nervous, right? Hey, you know what? It's a big. I'll give it. I mean, this is way off.
How do you? Okay, let's.
This is story time with Uncle Steve time.
Let's do this because I'm actually very curious now. Okay. How does one review a bowling ball?
So there's so many. Oh man. So there's different. People say you just throw a ball down an alley. No. So there's the alley that you see. If you go to open bowling, you just throw the plastic ball that you get on the rack and you throw it straight at the pins and you hope for the best. No, in league bowling, and this is a minor version of like pro bowling, they put down oil patterns, and they're all different. Okay. And the weather can affect them and everything, and it affects how the ball rolls. So they have these cover stocks on them. That's what they call them. It's basically like either a snow tire or a Formula One tire. That's how you best to describe it. It's like the tire, the cover stock, the outer part of the ball is the tire, and the inner part of the ball, the core, is the engine. So these reviewers go on and say, well, this ball is good for this particular oil condition, or when the lane breaks down or it gets dry and the ball starts hooking more, you go to something weaker that has like a slicker tire that's a weaker engine, so you can kind of control where the ball is going. It's a rabbit hole when you start getting down there.
I believe it. I love that they like add an outer layer like of is it
so it's a resin. It's a resin. So they used to just be plastic back in the 70s. Then in the 80s they went to urethane, which has a bit more texture to it and absorbs more oil. Now they have these reactive resin balls, which are built like sponges. So they pick up the oil and they read the lane and they hit. So yeah, there's a core, and then there's the outer shell around it. There's like a 3-piece construction to a bowling ball.
Are there controversies in it where like people are applying illegal materials to the outer side?
So there was balls that were banned a couple years ago because they were too soft. So that was a big thing in the 70s. The pros used to soak the balls in this corrosive material to make it softer. So there's rules on how hard the ball has to be. Because the softer, like if your tire starts deflating, it covers more of the road because it kind of bows out a little bit. Same thing with a ball. If a ball's softer,
like millimeters make a difference in bowling.
Absolutely.
I love this. Oh, this is so interesting. Okay, so let's go back to Android, XR, and Gemini. So there are three things I think that are really kind of worth talking about with Gemini. One is that it's just more efficient, right? And that is, so Google's not saying this is like a major leap forward in reasoning and all that stuff. It's basically, it is, but it's not the way that GPT 4.0 whatever was talked about as like, it's a much more resource intensive model, but it also allows for this new form of reasoning that is just much more closer to the way that a human thinks about making a decision.
Sure.
And Google's not necessarily saying this. It's saying we're combining everything into one model. It is smarter, but it's also just way more efficient. And we're going to use it everywhere. We're going to launch Gemini 2.0 Flash in our Gemini app. It's going to be on the web. It's going to power Astra, which is this multimodal agent thing that they demoed during I/O last year or this year. And the thing that's interesting about Astra is you were saying earlier, this is what kind of gets you excited because it combines the knowledge of a very kind of efficient, low latency, multimodal model with access to your camera.
Right.
And by doing both of those things, it allows the model to make decisions in near real time based on what you're seeing. And the closest thing that I can think of as a comparison is The Agent in Her, is the movie Her, where Scarlett Johansson's character is reacting in real time to what is being seen. He's got that cool folding phone that he puts in his
the little
pocket, and he's going around the world, and she's like reacting to this and growing and learning. Right. And that definitely feels like what Google is going for here. And there's this really interesting demo of somebody walking around London, just talking to this agent who is providing the character or whatever with feedback.
Right. And that's, to me, that's the application. That's what's going to make smartphones feel exciting again. That's why I think you see I mean, this is something I'm writing about this week about tensor and benchmarks and how Google's not really focused on a more powerful chipset, doesn't really care, because I think this is where the usefulness and the functionality and the utility is going to come from smartphones. And that's why Astra excites me the most. I like the idea of the overlay because VR makes me sick. VR makes me nauseous. I can't do the headsets. I did the PlayStation VR. It doesn't work. I can't. I get 10 minutes. I've tried the ginger drops. I've tried the things on your wrist or whatever. The whole thing just makes me sick. So it's the pass through extended reality AR that to me is the most interesting, because it could take your environment and just provide you with more information. It could record what's going on around you. It could give you instantaneous feedback, like in Her, about what's going on. Different restaurants that you're at, different areas that you're at. Hey, you're in this. I would love a situation where I'm walking around somewhere and says, hey, you really love retro tech. There's a place that's less than a 5-minute walk that has, retro stuff that I would have never even thought about going to. And it just gives me that direction, and then off I go. Those are the things that I want from when we first started talking about AI. It's great, and I love putting funky hats on my cats and stuff like that, and whatever else with the photos. That's fantastic, but that is in the realm of the, it just stays off to the side somewhere. Now we're getting to the point where it's stuff that I actually want that is useful, and that's why I was excited about Gemini 2.0. That's why I'm excited about Android XR, because we're starting to see that kind of break through. And like you said, the pace is incredible. It wasn't that long ago that we were in the Pixel Studio sketch to image, now image playground world of AI. And now within 6 months or so, we've kind of moved out of that to where we're looking forward to a lot more useful applications.
Yeah. So Astra, as it's described by Google, is alongside Gemini. And this is super confusing because it's unclear to me if Astra is that like a client that Gemini 2.0 works with, or if it's an agent that is integrated alongside or into Gemini. Then there's also Project Mariner, which is
creeps me out more, by the way.
Another thing that Google is talking about, but we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
This idea that Astra will take Google apps or services like Search, Lens, Maps, and proactively offer suggestions based on what it sees in the real world, or what it hears from you depending on what you're wearing. So Astra is not, it's platform agnostic from what I'm taking away from this, in that it will be integrated possibly into the Gemini app on your phone. It will maybe supplant Lens as the default UI that you interact with on your phone.
It's Google. It could just be everything.
It could just be everything. Yeah,
have all of them on there at once.
Right. So similar to what Apple is doing with this new feature, Apple, what's it called on iOS?
The visual, the accessibility thing,
visual intelligence.
Yes,
that's what it's called.
Which I use. So,
visual intelligence launched with 18.2 officially this week, and what you can do is use the camera control button. You hold it down, it opens a separate camera UI. You take a photo of a thing, and then it tells you that thing. It translates text, whatever.
Sure.
Lens, that's Lens. I mean, Google's been doing this forever with Lens.
Right.
It just doesn't have this native integration with the camera app. I mean, it sort of does, but Lens is this thing that's everywhere, and you may use it by accident sometimes. I don't know. Yeah. I've used it a handful of times, and it's sometimes useful. It's sometimes just annoying.
Right.
But increasingly, what it's looking like is that Google will use Astra as a way to push models to the visual space, and then allow the model to interpret what it sees.
Right.
And obviously, there are amazing potential outcomes of that. There are enormous privacy concerns with that Google is taking head on. And there are just a number of unanswered questions that we won't know the answers to until we actually get to play with Astra in the real world.
Right. Yeah, we'll talk about 18.2, I'm sure, later on, but I've used that, not that. Well, there's another one, the accessibility feature. Well, you open up the app and it'll just describe everything around you.
Right.
I mean, that one needs some work, but yeah, I mean, and that's really what we're getting to with that, is the implementation of Astra into real world usage. and I love it for foldables. I think foldables for the last couple of years have been, or large foldables, I should say, have been a solution in search of a problem. I think I don't know how many real world, how many out in the wild Z Fold 6s you've seen, or foldables over outside of tech enthusiasts. I've seen one in 6 years of foldables. I think it gives something.
You got to get out of New Jersey, my
apparently
friend.
I've seen one. I just,
I've seen a
I
few.
don't think it's so, but it gives them some purpose instead of just being a large smartphone. I feel like if you're going to have those overlays, if you're going to have Astra, if you're going to have all these things that you could utilize the camera and you can see, those are things that you're going to want a larger display for. And I think it really helps out those form factors in building up the value in, say, a $2,000 device.
Tell me more about what you mean by the killer app on foldables, because I'm always skeptical of the idea that like your phone is a thing that you will hold up to the world,
right?
Rather than you just put it back in your pocket. Like, I think companies are acknowledging that like phones they're still the central brain of your digital life, but like nobody really wants to. It's almost like the iPad as a camera problem.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's particular. That's really bold. When you're talking 10 point whatever 11 inches, then you're really getting this in front of your face. I think there's a way to do it with the foldables that kind of makes it less obtrusive. Like I use Star Walk. I don't know if people use Star Walk, where you're kind of looking at the night sky in that way, and
right?
The gyroscope moves it with it, and you can look at stars. That to me is, and it's definitely a stopgap. By the way, that's not the final goal. But until we could get to where these glasses, whatever they happen to be, don't need like the Apple Vision Pro, you don't need to be connected to a wall outlet, or you don't need to carry around a giant battery pack in your pocket. That will be then the outlet to the world, where you have the overlay of the information coming through on your glasses, which I would love too. But until we get to that point, which might be the prototypes that we've seen, at least getting us closer to that, until we get to that, I think there's an element where having your smartphone out doing that is easier than, say, something like cumbersome glasses or things that you don't want to wear just naturally. You have your phone when you need it, you take it out. Here's the street I'm on. Show me what's here. I'm walking to X location. Show me what's up. And then you could get those different bonuses like, hey, there's something over here. There's something over here. So I think it's a stopgap for sure, but it makes it slightly more useful in the meantime.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. If only because like I think the idea of wearables on your face is just a more sensible solution.
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
But you're right. Like the technical barrier to that is enormous, and it's also right now not really feasible. So we've seen a few companies try this out. Google ended up buying North, the company that tried this many years ago with actual AR glasses. And I got one of the first units. It had a small heads-up display, used a little ring as a joystick.
Right.
They had dedicated stores that you would go into and get it fitted for your face so that your eyes were properly calibrated to the frames. Like it was all bespoke. It was extremely expensive.
Right.
Google ended up buying the company, shut down the whole thing. But that is largely why we have Astra today.
Sure.
And it's interesting to me that it took Google 5-6 years to get to this point. But now we're at a point where we have the software layer. We have 3 layers. We have the software layer in Android XR, and we'll talk about that in a second. We then have the agent layer with Gemini and like Astra and Mariner and all these things.
Right.
And then we have the hardware. And Google is ceding control of the hardware on the XR side or AR, VR side to its partners. And that to me is super interesting. But let's talk about XR first. So
sure.
We have Gemini, we have Astra, we have Mariner. These are the sort of middle layers. We have agents coming that will do things for you, right? You tell your glasses to find you a store that sells retro games or whatever. It goes out and does the thing. It comes back. You ask for whether there are sales on. It'll go and find you a coupon. I don't know. We'll see. It's all capitalism.
Well, that's part of Mariner, right? Is that's
capitalism all the way down.
It kind of goes out and does those things for you.
Yeah. Well, that's it, right? And then this is kind of a side thing, but Gemini 2.0 for games is another one where Google is sort of playing around with this idea of how can an AI help you in like everyday activities?
Sure.
you're playing a board game or you're playing a multiplayer game, and it's like feeding you tips.
You got the hacks on. You have wall hacks basically on playing your board game. You're playing chess. It's feeding you moves and the heads-up display.
Look, to me, like if I could learn how to play chess better by just wearing a pair of glasses with an overlay,
oh sure,
that would be awesome. Like I've seen these things with the Quest. The Quest 2 has very low quality pass through. The Quest 3 has much better pass through.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen this, and it's really helpful. I mean, you can learn how to play the piano. You can learn how to play chess. You can do all these things with proper pass-through. So anyway, Android XR is this solution, the software layer. It's the first new version of Android since Automotive, which was announced 8 years ago, 7 years ago in 2017.
Yeah.
And it's this layer that will allow developers to build multimodal visual solutions for your face.
Yep.
And whether it's in a dedicated VR headset or AR glasses or something in between, it will run Google services natively. I think the killer app there will be YouTube, which basically doesn't exist on the Vision Pro.
Right.
And it will be cheaper, which will also be an advantage. And the question that I have, which I'm curious about your take on, is this actually something Google will stick with? Because I think a lot of people are asking that question. Google killing not only apps, but platforms in general. It had Daydream. Daydream disappeared. And it's gone. I think this makes sense in a world of AI, but this feels tentative at best.
I get it. And you're completely justified in that, just given Google's track record. And this is coming from somebody who's been very critical of the company before. I was removed from Team Pixel.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No more free phones for you.
No. That's it. I'm out. Because I was critical of a lot of the decisions made and the planning and everything. But with that said, the last 6 months or so, I've started to regain confidence in Google. Now, it's totally possible that Google will turn around and punish me for that. But because it's happened multiple times before, but just based off of, and there's no reason for any particular confidence outside of the Pixel devices themselves, because the Pixel tablet, they had the same kind of wishy-washiness, the different app layers they've had and the different difficulties there. So I get it. But at the same time, I think that the focus is there. You can see it on the phone side that the company is capable of putting its mind to something and following through for a while. And I think that lesson might boil over into other stuff. And you're getting the quick pace is something as well. That's something that I'm sure has frustrated the company in the past with how quickly things come to fruition. We're seeing a lot of that now with AI in quick succession. These things are being worked on. They're useful in the marketplace, or they're useful to consumers. So I think there's enough behind it where this isn't going to be one of those things that we talk about for a week, and then 6 months from now, oh, they're on to something else, or it didn't really pan out. I think because these are things that people will actually use, they're natural. They don't have to do it. People won't have to do anything out of their comfort zone. People already wear glasses. They wear sunglasses. People already carry around smartphones. It won't be a complete lifestyle change for people. And that, I think, helps with adoption. So I think you're going to see Google stick this one out in a way that it would probably be difficult with other projects in the past.
You're right in a couple of ways. One is that this is a much better time to launch a VR platform than it was in 2016, right?
Sure.
The world was not ready for VR back then.
The tech wasn't there either. I mean, that's
what I mean. Like the tech wasn't there. It was cumbersome. The apps weren't good. The hardware wasn't ready. We're at the point now where Qualcomm, Apple, they're all making efficient enough chips that you can see the Quest, right? The Quest is a perfect example of this. And it's interesting that Meta is so far ahead in this space on both the VR and pseudo AR side, right? Like if you think about the Meta Ray-Ban glasses.
That's a great example. Like,
and they don't have a camera. They don't have a HUD, but they have a camera, and they can still use the camera to work with the model.
And that's the idea. And those are natural glasses. You're just wearing them a little chunky on the frames, but that was something that's not a big crossover for people. It's not a big barrier to entry. Whereas these big, you're not walking around with the Quest. You're not walking around with an Apple Vision Pro. I mean, look, until we get to the point where it's like you said, it's like a Ray-Ban, it's like just your regular glasses where it's complete pass-through. I don't need cameras passing through what I'm seeing. It's just pass-through of my environment, and it's an overlay over that. When we get to that point, I think you're going to see pretty easy adoption of this stuff because it's too interesting not to have. And the price point, like you said, the price is coming at the price point is not going to be prohibitive for a lot of people.
So Meta talked about Orion earlier this year in September. It made a big splash about a product that it will never release. But what they said was like, it's an AR product, AR first. It has a HUD.
Right.
It allows you to like, it has very accurate hand tracking. It is the prototype of something that will eventually come to market. But right now, if they were to release this product, the hardware is not there and it would be $10,000, right? Yeah. It's also the reason Apple released the Vision Pro as a VR headset rather than a set of AR glasses, which is obviously where they want to get to.
Sure.
And I think Google, by seeding Android XR today with the current state of hardware and by showing prototypes of Astra on what looks like a pair of AR glasses, but not saying Astra itself is the endpoint,
right,
is setting itself up for 10 years of iteration on this, right?
I mean, that could be. I mean, that's certainly something. I mean, it's going to depend on, battery tech. I mean, it's going to depend on a lot of different things, these form factors of how easily they can shrink a lot of this down. Or is it something like you said, the Ray-Ban might be a great example where you have the camera and it's talking to your phone and it's not as battery intensive and you're not doing as much on device. And if you can add a heads up display to that, I think that's something that you go for. I mean, do you agree though that people won't walk around? Let's say they get it to a point where they can release it. There's an AR, there's the thinner version of the Quest, but it's still pass through. Are you okay walking around with an AR version of something, even if it's Android XR, with a pass through as opposed to just using your eyes and just having it be a heads up display or an overlay?
Yeah, absolutely.
You'd walk around with it? I give you credit. I give you credit.
Well, I mean, nobody's going to know.
Oh, you mean, so it's like Apple Vision Pro does it, where your eyes are showing out through the thing? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, sorry. You mean walking around with a proper VR headset?
You're walking around.
No. I mean, nobody's going to do that. That's why, that's why Apple has very quickly had to pivot away from the Vision Pro as this all-encompassing workhorse style AR, VR.
Yes.
It's a VR headset that can do pass-through with a bunch of decent cameras.
Right.
But the killer app there is you're on a plane connected to an outlet and you're watching a Christopher Nolan movie with nobody else watching over your shoulder.
Exactly.
That is the killer app there.
Right.
And that's not worth $3,500.
No.
But it's getting there. And I think Google understands that if it needs to compete both with Meta and Apple, which it absolutely does, if it believes that AR is the natural next step, even if it doesn't supplant our phones but augments our phones, for lack of a better term.
That's what it'll be. I like
which
that.
I agree with. And I also think Google has an advantage in that most people use Google services irrespective of platform. When I use an iPhone, the Google app is my most used app because I open it all the time to do Google searches. I like the Google Discover feed. I think I use Google Maps more than Apple Maps. I use Gmail. There are services baked into the Google user that is platform agnostic. And Google understands that it has a number of these very sticky services that will be attractive to people regardless of what screen they're using it on.
Yeah. And just when you look at the just take it, the translation apps or just translation in general, just being able to have the overlay of what the other person is saying right on your glasses would be fantastic. I had an example. I think I put it in the discussion group this week where I tried to use Gemini Live for a conversation in Spanish. It did not go well. But if there were a version of that where I'm just wearing my glasses and what the person is saying to me in Spanish is just translated right on the screen. I mean, just those type of things are just so useful. And that's why I think it will stick, and that Google will stick with it. And like you said, because there's just so many things just built in where Google has that natural advantage. Am I going to switch email apps because somebody else comes out with something? No. Am I going to use some other proprietary app for maps because some other company has a pair of? No. So Google has the advantage to have all of this set up. They already have the infrastructure there. It's just a matter of translating it to this new form factor, which I think I do have confidence that it'll happen. Like, it could totally be like what you say. It could take 10 years of, well, we release this one, and maybe the company does give up. But I do think somebody, unlike other Google projects where other people Google might give up and other people might not deal with it. If Google does quit out on it, which I don't think it will, other people will be there to pick up the mantle and go with it, because I do think that's the direction we're going. Someone's going to get there. It's just a matter of time.
So that leads us into the discussion around hardware. So as a part of the announcement yesterday with Android XR, Google shared the stage with Samsung to show off a prototype mixed reality headset called Project Moohan, which will eventually come out next year as a finished product to compete with the Vision Pro. Now, there are a couple of interesting parts of this. One is that it's right now aimed at developers. So Google and Samsung are not talking about names or price or final form factor. But what we know is that the prototype, which looks more or less like a finished product, or if you squint hard enough, you can see what the finished product will look like, will basically take the form of something that looks like a mix of the Vision Pro and a Meta Quest headset. Slightly sleeker than a Meta Quest, but probably a little bit more expensive. I'm thinking like $1,000, right? Maybe a little bit less. Which is still considerably cheaper than a Vision Pro. It's not aimed as closely as the Meta Quests are as a VR headset. You'll be able to block all the light if you want to, but this is right now the Quest for most people is a gaming experience, whereas this is largely being marketed as a way to experience like Google's open ecosystem and to really take advantage of Gemini, right?
Right.
So you'll be able to watch YouTube, but you'll also be able to ask Gemini all this stuff. You'll be able to see something on a map and go and walk towards it. And like, yes, it's annoying to wear a big VR headset, and I don't think anybody's going to use it out in the world, but like, it's still something that Google plans to push first as like a more comprehensive solution to mixed reality than even Apple or Meta can offer right now.
And that's it. It's even though it's not the final form of what we're talking about, it's a more useful product and probably a complete product than the Apple Vision Pro was. It adds the value for less money that I think is lacking in the Apple Vision Pro. Like you said, the inclusion of Gemini, where you could be watching YouTube and get information and talk to it, and get to pull up different things. And hey, pull up this email, pull up the documents, and pull up the corresponding calendar, and you could just talk to it and do all these things. I think that's the value that at $3,500, the Apple Vision Pro never really got to, not even close. That I think Samsung and Google have a real shot at with a product, even if it's not the product that you're going to walk around with the streets with. It's still something that you could use at home, you could use in the office. It's still something that as a companion or an AI assistant would be a lot more useful than what we've seen previously.
Yeah, and neither company is really saying much more about it. If you look at the renders of Project Moohan, there are no cords. And you wonder, okay, well, the Vision Pro, which is one of the most technically advanced products ever made at $3,500, still needs a corded battery pack to function longer than.
Maybe it's that big hook, the big tented part around the eyes. Maybe that's the battery pack. You just wear it on the front of your forehead or something like that. That'd be a great.
And Google did not let anybody take photos of the prototype units too. Anybody who got to try it, and there were a few bigger media outlets that got to try it, were not allowed to use their own photos, which is like the biggest red flag you can think of.
Yeah, there's some massive battery pack underneath this thing where it's just it's a huge cord and you got to carry around. You got to wear a backpack.
I mean, remember when Google or when Apple showed people the Vision Pro for the first time?
Yeah.
And they had people sitting down in a chair. And even though they were allowed to use their own photos, they were not allowed to change their orientation because Apple really tried to hide the cord that led to the battery pack.
Yeah.
And it was not until the Vision Pro was released earlier this year that people were like, oh yeah, like that's egregious.
Yeah, and it's huge too. I mean, it's just, and then the cord going to it, it's not something that. So I hope that that's not. But you, like you said, it's a tech product. It uses a lot of power with the displays and everything else. It's going to have some solution like that. And if they're already being cautious about photos and people using it, then those are giant red flags.
Yeah.
There's obviously something there that just leads to a massive brick on the floor that you're going to have to make do with somehow.
Right. So that's something that we're going to have to wait for. There's not a lot of information on either Android XR or Project Moohan. Now, what we know of Android XR is that it is a platform similar to Android, where you will be able to leverage existing apps. Android apps will just work, which is great. Developers won't have to do anything to get the app working in 2D space. Plus the fact that Google's worked on a bunch of stuff to make 2D photos and videos into 3D. That will kind of give you a bit of a spatial and immersive experience without doing much to the source. And then obviously developers can build for the platform, charge for apps, etc., build out new experiences. So I use the Quest 2. You can kind of, if you're watching the video feed, you can see it hanging on my on my bike there as a workout station for Supernatural. Supernatural is like my killer app for VR. It's amazing, and I've been using it for 3 years now, pretty regularly, and it's worth my time. Like I love it. I use it. It's great. And I know, like, my friend Nick Sutrick at Android Central is big into gaming on his Quest. He's played basically everything. And I get notified of all of these games that are hitting the Quest. And it seems like the platform is now just primarily a gaming. I don't know if they're, I mean, there are a bunch of AAA titles, but there aren't, I wouldn't say they're AAA in the same sense as like big studios are spending hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, the money's not there. The payoff isn't there yet.
But it might be coming, right? And like having another platform for developers to put their stuff on that isn't Apple, because the install base of a Vision Pro until it drops below $1,000 is going to be tiny. You know, if Google can release alongside Samsung and maybe Lenovo and all its other hardware partners a set of decently priced VR headsets that developers can just port their games over to, that's a win. Although, to be honest, like the price of the Quest, it's what, $599, $499,
something like $499. Yeah,
and then there's the Quest 3S, which is $399, which is basically a rebranded Quest 2. That is pretty compelling.
It's compelling, but then you said, like you said, you add in those other things. You add in the low barrier to entry for developers. You add in the constant platform with Android that apps will just work. You add in Gemini. You add in all the functionality that a device running this software would have. And then that $500 that, unless you have a specific use case, like you're working out with or you're gaming, it takes it out of those kind of limited circumstances and makes it more of a general purpose, general use device.
Right.
That where you might not consider, I'm not going to game. I'm not going to get $500. I got a PlayStation. I got something else. VR makes me sick. I don't work out that much or whatever. I'm not going to use it for that. So it takes it out of those questions and make it so, well, you know, I use email. I use maps. I watch YouTube. I use Gemini. All these things that people already do, and now you could do it in this with glasses that come out with this software. I think, and then you have multiple manufacturers, so you can have competition. You can have decent prices. I think that's something that's going to be a lot more attractive to people in the long run than, say, something that is limited like the Meta devices.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I hope. I don't know. We'll see. But I was wrong about the price. It's $299 for the 3S and $499 for the 3, which is actually cheaper than I thought.
But you have to think about when you're buying one of those. It's still $300, okay, which is not a boatload compared to a lot of the other tech. But you have to sit there and you have to think about how you're going to use it. Mm-hmm. You have to go into the store saying, "I want one of those because I game, because I'm working out, or because this." Mm-hmm. You could walk into a Best Buy and look at one of these Google devices that comes out running Android XR and not necessarily have to know how you're going to use it. You just looking at the back of the box, say, well, I use all those apps already. I use YouTube. I use this. I use Gemini. And you buy it because you don't have to think about, you're not going in with a purpose of, I need it for this. You're just walking around like, wait a minute, I could use something like that. I think it's just a different mindset from a buying perspective. I think a lot more people would be okay spending $300 on something they're already familiar with. It's just a different way of doing stuff they're already familiar with, as opposed to going at it with a specific need like gaming or fitness.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that people will buy VR to do the things that they're already doing on their phones.
Not to replace a phone, no.
But I see where you're coming from in the sense that if they're marketing this as a gaming headset, a virtual assistant that actually is useful, and your best way to watch YouTube,
right?
Then those are the iPhone is an iPod, a communicator, and an internet browser, right?
Yes,
the Steve Jobs trifecta,
the 3-in-1. Yes,
I think that is more compelling than a single reason.
Yeah,
and for most people, even Apple's muddled reasoning for wanting to even if they had introduced the Vision Pro at $1,000 or $1,500, I still think the message around why you would want it was muddled.
Yes,
because they didn't want to admit that it was a VR headset. So they didn't lean in to the consumption side of it until when they announced Vision Pro or Vision OS 2 earlier this year. And they did the same thing with the Apple Watch, where the first Apple Watch was this beautiful, expensive piece of art that you would want to show off to people.
Yep.
And then it took until version 3 for them to realize that it was basically just a fitness tracker with a nicer screen.
With a nicer display, yeah.
And they were like, okay, yeah, let's just lean into that. And I think it'll take Apple until Vision Pro 2 or Vision Pro SE or whatever they end up calling it.
Get it, right.
For them to really admit that this is just a really good consumption device. Because, I don't know, Google's track record around AR is not great. Its track record around VR is not great. But its services are
keep
great.
Going down the line, but yes.
But its services are great. And Gemini is further ahead than any of the other AI assistants. And I don't trust Apple to make Apple Intelligence good enough by the time Vision Pro 2 comes out than I do, ironically, Samsung and Google to collaborate on a less expensive VR headset with Gemini powering Android XR. I actually think that will be a much more cohesive experience.
Yeah.
And it'll be affordable.
Yeah, and there was a couple things there. The affordability makes the third thing, but but everyone's had a case where I know when I first started dating my wife, she would want to play something or watch something on the television, and I would actually set up a separate monitor to play or watch something else. You could just have you have your headset on, and then that second screen or display and everything there is taken care of. But what you said about Apple not trusting Apple to have it in working order by the time an Apple Vision Pro comes out, it was really shocking to me to see just how far behind Apple feels and how half-baked Apple Intelligence feels right now, even with 18.2.
Yeah.
It just, I'm just not used to that. My brain is, you come from the same time, but just from 20 years ago, you're just not used to that feeling of Apple releasing something that doesn't work amazing, isn't the best at anything, and feels behind. It's just really concerning. And Apple 18.2 is the worst example, or the best example, I should say, of all of that, because it's just the software has been going downhill for a few years, and Apple Intelligence just highlights the shortcomings.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, let's end talking about iOS 18.2 because there are some interesting things to this release. Obviously, for me, I get official access to it in Canada for the first time.
Right.
But I think Image Playground and Genmoji, while kind of silly, are better than their Android equivalents.
The pictures I got were better on Image Playground, yes.
Yeah. And that alone, and I think just the integration with iMessage, like Genmoji's integration with iMessage is a killer app, right? Being able to basically create emoji that sit in your keyboard, combined with iMessage, is going to be the thing that makes this sticky.
Right.
And as good as Pixel Studio is, and as good as Emoji Kitchen, which just got a boost in the last couple of weeks with the December Pixel drop, I think Apple's scale and the fact that it's so good at integrating these new services in a seamless way will make it much more widely used.
Yeah, maybe Apple knows that. Maybe that's the secret sauce, where it knows that that's the front end application. People are going to use it for social media or for iMessage. It's going to be great. Kids are going to catch on to it. And that's what's important on the front facing side of it. So yeah, you're right. The scale, the integration, putting it with iMessage is certainly something that will make it popular, and just the scale. But it just seems like the other stuff is a step behind what Google's doing.
So what do you think of iOS 18.2 so far?
I tried a couple of the things. I tried. There's the accessibility stuff, which I give Apple credit for, by the way. A lot of the stuff on the accessibility side, like the AirPods being used as hearing aids. Now they have a thing where the camera, you could open up accessibility and it'll just describe what's going on around you. Needs a lot of work. It recognized my Christmas tree. It mistook a teddy bear under the tree for a child sitting under the tree, which if you didn't know a child was under the tree, that might be slightly alarming. And there were, so it needs work, but I do like at least the direction it's going in. I guess my problem is I'm not used to, at one point, however many years ago, was the point where Apple was doing stuff first and it was done well. Mm-hmm. Then it got to the point where, well, Apple was going to be dead last coming out with something, but at least they'd put their own spin on it and it'd be working well. Now I'm to the point where they come out with something, not necessarily the best, not necessarily the most polished, and not necessarily working as well. So that was just what's taken aback. That takes me aback about 18.2. That kind of throws me off a little bit, is that element of it. But I do like a lot of where it's going. And you're right. I think the angle on that with the Genmoji and Image Playground and the implementation with iMessage is going to be the killer function for a lot of people, especially young people using iPhones, and the rest of the stuff won't even matter. But I do think that for the first time in a while, Google's a full step ahead on Gemini level AI stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Google has done a better job productizing AI, ironically, even though Apple typically
I know they're marketing,
has taken a more experience by experience approach, right? And with 18.2, like there's ChatGPT integration, which is kind of interesting.
Right.
But I had a briefing with Apple this week about it and asked them like the compose stuff. So there's a model inside the Mail app or anywhere with a writing prompt where you can edit, summarize.
Yeah.
Right. You can get summaries of your email threads, all this stuff. That's Apple's own model. But if you want to compose something from scratch, if you describe what you want to say, that actually goes out to ChatGPT.
Right.
Their model is not built for creation. It's built for modification and summarization.
Right.
And I think that just speaks to Apple's timidity in like everything has to be so rigid in like how it's implemented from a privacy and security perspective that they're ceding control to its competitors essentially in order to do the more interesting, technically difficult stuff. Right. And I think that internal limitation or that internal kind of like moral center is what's going to keep Apple Intelligence from actually being a better product, because OpenAI and Google have no like moral uncertainty about what they're doing.
They're not worried about it. Just go full speed ahead. Yeah. And Apple's sitting there thinking about every move.
Right. And this idea of Apple using data centers in a way that is much more private and much more secure to make it possible to use their models in the cloud while keeping your data private. Like, but that's all well and good. Right. And I think that will be, from a technical perspective, something that many companies try to emulate. It's not an advantage outside of this very small group of people that care about it. Because doesn't
Apple have to do that though? I mean, if they were to lose, privacy is one of the last things, and security is one of the last things that I think iOS really can clutch to for the most part. So if they were to make a mistake there, and all of a sudden there would be a breach or any sort of issue with that, that would really unravel what I think is the basis of what they're trying to do and protect me. And for years, like with the App Store and the walled garden and the entire experience in the ecosystem has been built around protecting the experience and protecting consumers. And I think if Apple were to make a mistake there, it would just wipe away the core of what's been trying to be done. I think they're willing to sacrifice the lead to Google in that way if it means that they could wipe out a big portion of their user base by just rattling that confidence that's been built up over the last 15 years or so.
Yeah, that's not in doubt. But I think the reality is that most of the time Apple's privacy message hits home because it's very straightforward and sensible. But here, it's a little bit muddled because they're saying that they're going to use the data centers for the larger, more powerful models, but they're not telling you specifically what is going up into the cloud and what's not, and what's staying on device. And it will also depend on the product. So your iPhone 16 and 16 Pro might leverage the cloud for things that your iPhone 17 doesn't, because the hardware is more powerful, so they can put those models locally. They're not telling you what is actually leaving your phone and what isn't, because they're trying to say to you that the experience is the same.
Right.
And that may be true, right? But I think that message gets muddled because we don't know what is local and what's not. And if that's the case, and the fact that the OpenAIs and the Googles of the world, while promoting privacy through locally installed models, they are going to muddle the message even further, because they don't really want you to think about it either.
Well, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
They just want to do the thing that's the most cost effective and fast.
And we'll get it. And we'll get it. It's like what we had with apps using the microphone and the camera. Eventually, we got the granular control over in Android about what can access what. It might be a situation where it won't happen at first, but there might be a situation where we eventually have to get to that point where we have to sit there and have the tools to. I don't even know how you do that, to be perfectly honest, because like you said, it's taking in so much information. It's trying to do so much with the models, and you don't know what's on device. You don't know what's going to the cloud, and you don't know which information it's sending around. But I don't even know how you start to police that. But it's not as simple as just turning off your camera or turning off your microphone like it is now, or sharing data or tracking advertising information. But I don't even know if there's a way to come up with a model or even a setting where you can have that granular control of, okay, well, this goes to the cloud. You'd have to be sitting there for 2 hours.
That's what you don't want that. Like, the companies don't want that. You don't want that. Right. You don't want to think about it. But that's the problem with AI, is that like you need it to get to the point where it's passive and invisible.
Right.
And also you don't want to cede all of your control unnecessarily. Right. You want active disclosure, but passive action, right? I want to be able to know, but I don't want that to get in the way of the experience. And that tension is difficult.
And the tension is difficult. And you by just the definition, though, if you want something done passively, if you want these features, you are ceding some of that privacy away. You are surrendering a lot of that privacy. How much of it, I don't know. They don't have the answer, obviously, clearly yet. But I think we're going to have to be comfortable with, if we want these services, if we want these assistants, if we want all this included, there might just not be an answer. And it's just be, okay, if you want the ease of use, if you want to offload some of this workload that you have onto assistants, if you want to have these things around you, that you're going to just have to live with the fact that you're going to have less privacy. And it's just whether people are willing to accept that or not. But I do think just naturally, by the just definition of having something passively do stuff for you, you're surrendering privacy.
I agree.
It knows what you're doing. So it's just a matter of, are you comfortable with it or not? If you're not, then put tinfoil around your device and off you go. But if you are, then you're going to be happy with, I think, what's coming next.
I think what's the most concerning, at least on the Android side, is that Gemini is really hard to disable.
Right.
Like it's taking.
You got to uninstall the whole package, right? Don't you have to go in and uninstall the AI core or the whole package?
Well, you can disable it, but like when you onboard your phone, it's now the thing that you opt into instead of Assistant.
Right.
And because it is replaced Assistant, you can't do the basic local stuff without it, unless you revert to Assistant, which you can still do. But I see a time in the future where that's not possible. Like, that's the thing,
What scares me about what you talked about Mariner, where it was making I understand it would go in and like you have to buy a flight. You say, well, buy a flight. Like, where's the level of also the privacy and security where someone can insert themselves in that layer there, and all types of issues for problems when you're dealing with money and transactions, and if someone were able to get between that layer and data breaches, not just data breaches anymore. They're buying things on behalf of other people, and it's your assistant doing it.
Yeah.
So it does get scary in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the less, and that's going to be it for Apple and Google, how to make it less scary, how to make it secure, but because, you can have it where we don't think about it all you want. But the second there's a giant problem or a data breach, or people are buying things that they're not supposed to be buying, or there's all these types of issues, then it's going to come to the forefront in a hurry. So I hope they're working on it, but that is going to be the big question. How much of our privacy are we comfortable giving away?
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. So
sure,
we'll talk a bit more about that in the new year, I'm sure. Will be back next week. We'll talk about our year-end lists, our favorite devices, our favorite media, our favorite experiences, everything we did this year. I will spend the entire time talking about. I'm going to go through every single book that I read. That's now 86, which is the most books I've ever read in a year.
Well done.
I'm extremely proud of this.
Well done.
What we do typically at the end of each show, Stephen, is we ask the person on the other end of the line to tell us what's making us happy. What's making them happy this week? So what is making you happy this week?
So my daughter learned to clap yesterday.
Yeah,
9 months old. Just doing it. It's the closed fist. It's like, one of these, but she got it, and it's just it was pretty good. She mimics stuff now, so that's what she did. So we did this, and then she started doing this.
Oh, that's so cute.
The clapping. 9 months.
Oh man,
9 months. So we're starting. Yeah, we're starting to get to the fun stuff. She's starting to learn stuff. She's, every day she learns something different. So that was that yesterday. She does a thing where she shakes heads and wants me to shake my head too. And we just mimic back and forth with that. She gets a big kick out of that. But definitely just watching the development there every day is fun. And so every time she gets learns something new, just the the satisfaction on her face and just the laugh that she gets when she learns something new is incredible. And that's certainly what made me happy this week.
Love it.
And yourself?
What is making me happy this week? I finished a book that is a very long book. It stuck with me. It's called Hild. And it's all about this woman from the 7th century England who was extremely important to like the building of the British Empire. She was in real life, she became a saint, and you may know her as Saint Hilda.
Okay.
But she was a real person. This is a fictionalized version of her and her family. But it's like an 800-page book all about like her life from when she was a kid up until her early 20s. And it's just this massive tome that takes the 7th century very seriously.
Okay.
And it was just fascinating to listen to and learn about the way that the Middle Ages was nothing like what we think of it, and basically exactly like what we think of it, right? We think of the Middle Ages as like knights and kings and rival wards and like, all this stuff. But there was a lot more to technology than we thought about. And from my perspective, what was so interesting is the 600s were when, right after the fall of the Roman Empire, there was this growth of Christianity that was permeating throughout Western Europe, and it was coming to England in a big way. But these old Scandinavian Anglo-Saxon gods were still the prominent gods. And when we think about that time, I would think about Christianity as being much more pervasive. But it was around this time that this tension between the old gods and the new god were taking shape. And that to me was just so fascinating that like we have these warrior priests running around with gangs trying to baptize people forcefully.
Right.
And it wasn't this like kind and huggy like form of Christianity that we have today. It was like, your God is bad. My God is good. My God is spiteful and he will murder you. And if you don't listen to me, I'm going to murder you. And it was just, it was a very interesting perspective on.
It gets people in the church, I'm sure. That's quite strange.
Yeah, well, it did. So this is Hild. There's a sequel to it that just came out last year, but it's a long book. It's a good one. I recommend it.
Nice.
Very
nice.
That's what's making me happy this week.
Historical fiction is fun. I like it.
All right, that's the show. Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have you back again.
I love it. All right.
Until then, we hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.